the folks in the Amazon Labor Union, they freaking did it, man.
They did
won.
it. That's one of the biggest wins in our lifetimes, frankly.
The largest NLRB election win in like 50 years.
Which side are you on? Which side are you on?
Last week, working folks scored a huge victory.
Hell yeah.
Absolutely huge. The Amazon Labor Union won the first union election at an Amazon in the United States. And it was not even particularly close. It wasn't even particularly close, which is just fascinating. So the genesis for that campaign really began about 2 years ago in March 2020, as the pandemic was just beginning. Back then, we knew very little about it. You know, we knew like at that point, people were like still wearing gloves because they were wondering about like, oh, is this going to, you know, is it going to travel through surfaces? We didn't know that it was like aerosolized. We knew very, very little about it. And Amazon was not taking the concerns of its workers seriously. So many of them staged a walkout, including Chris Smalls, who was fired for it. And according to ALU worker organizers for the Amazon Labor Union, Smalls had a great reputation among the workers. So his firing really kind of further incensed people against the company. From there, Smalls and other Amazon workers created the Congress of Essential Workers. They staged a lot of protests, and they were kind of inspired by the Bessemer campaign to organize at their own workplace. Take some of what they were doing down in Bessemer and do some things differently. But the idea, from my understanding of the reporting, the idea to actually form a union as opposed to do some other advocacy came from seeing the folks down in Bessemer, which is really cool. And so from there, they started the work of organizing their sisters and brothers on the job. And in a certain sense, they followed the playbook. Workers led the way. They mapped out leaders and got them on their side. They had real conversations with their coworkers. They built trust. Workers publicly supported the union, signaling that it was safe to do so. And, you know, those are all like, if you read any organizing manual, if you listen to any union organizer talk about how to organize your workplace, these are all things that like everybody says to do, right? These are all super by the book kind of stuff. But in another sense, they did deviate from the playbook significantly. For one, they were independent. They had no affiliation with a larger union. They're still independent. They intend to remain independent. Chris Smalls announced in a press conference after he met with the Teamsters International president, Sean O'Brien, that they will not be affiliating with the Teamsters. They will not be affiliating with anybody else. They're going to remain independent, even though some of these other unions are now going to be giving them some more backing, some more support. They had little to no paid staff. Compared to like in Alabama, there were like a dozen, I think, almost, like, you know, between 6 and 12 full-time staff at least throughout the whole campaign. They only spent $120,000 over the course of the campaign. That's crazy little.
Compared to the millions,
Yes.
potentially tens of millions being spent by Amazon to bust the campaign. And
they only filed with 30%. So to have an NLRB election, you've got to file to have an NLRB union election, you have to show 30% support. You have to get 30% of the workers in the facility saying, I support the union, I want to be union, and that is what triggers a union election. But the normal advice that organizers have is that you can't file at 30%, because if you file at 30%, then the boss is going to dig out a lot of the support that you have. Like, you're going to only lose support from the amount that you file is the normal advice. And so never file with 30%. You always file with at least 60, preferably 70, 80, 90%. The deviation was public, right? Everybody knew that they only filed with 30%. Everybody knew that they didn't have a lot of funding. Everybody knew that they didn't have paid staff. Everybody knew that they were independent. while it was difficult for people on the outside, people like us, to see the things that they were doing that conformed to conventional wisdom, which created significant doubts among union organizers across the country, including myself, right? I mean, I was thinking stuff like how are you going to reach people with so few people on this full time, without paid staff? How are you going to reach 8,000 workers without full-time staff? I didn't see how it could be done. How will you get your message out with so little money to use? I didn't see how it could be done. How are you going to win an election with so few cards filed? I mean, when they initially actually failed to get 30%, and they had to withdraw their petition, and then they got more signatures, and then they refiled. And at that point, when they withdrew their petition, I was like, there's no way. There's no way these people are going to win. There's absolutely no way. And you know, so I was proven wrong. Another thing that kind of came out after that they didn't do, that was that normally you do, is that they didn't make house visits. Really, they tried it and they said that it didn't really work for them. And instead, what they did is they called people and they met outside and inside the facility. Which, again, meeting inside, they actually, part of their campaign was to use break rooms and stuff as, like, get-togethers for the union. And this is, this is stuff that union organizers, including myself, I just did a organizer training with the IWW, and, you know, the common advice is that preferably do not talk about the union at work. You know, don't have one-on-one conversations in the break room. Don't have one-on-one conversations on the shop floor. But that's what they were doing, and they were doing it like purposely that way because that's where it was easy to reach people. You know, so it worked. But it seems that they did the most important parts so well, talking to people, building relationships, that the other stuff, that it just didn't matter. You know, they didn't even that they even contribute their ability to win to some of their deviations. They said that without having a paid staff, without being affiliated with a larger union, they were able to more easily combat the company's line about being a third party, because they were like, we don't have any paid staff. We don't,
right.
We don't, like, what do you mean we're a third party? We are literally the only people on this campaign are Amazon workers.
Right. It's not an institution that's been around for 100 years. It's, not an organization with a headquarters in D.C. There is no way to dispute the grassroots nature of it. I mean, Amazon, of course, tried and will continue to, just as Starbucks is doing. But, it's as grassroots as it comes. Absolutely.
They said that, filing above 30% at an Amazon facility with 150% turnover rate is impossible. So filing at 30% actually locks in the eligible voter pool, right? So if you file at 30%, once you file, that locks it in. So, people who come after that date can't vote. They cannot vote after you file for election. So it locks in the voter pool, and you have like a specific number of people that you have to reach, instead of constantly trying to fill a bucket with water that has a hole in the bottom, right? So, really, really cool. Of course, Amazon's anti-union campaign in New York was the same as anywhere else. They said dues are bad. They tried to third-party the union, even though the union was just Amazon workers. They did captive audience meetings. They broke the law. They fired workers. They disciplined workers for supporting the union. They surveilled workers. They threatened workers for supporting the union. They spent millions of dollars, and that's just what's public, on union-busting third parties, including a prominent Democratic consulting firm, Global Strategies Group, which is a firm for which many of their clients have refused to comment on their union-busting activities, including the DCCC, the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, Emily's List, and a lot more. Like Iowa Democrats was another one. And none of these people have...
Even Senator Ed Markey has used them, which I was a little surprised by. Now, Joe Manchin, that didn't surprise me, but yeah, it's that's also just another reminder to check who you are hiring. And, like, if you're involved in a political campaign or you decide to get involved in a political campaign one day, be aware of the types of consultants and other folks that are going to want your money, and ask some questions and do some homework. Where else are they getting money? Because, frankly, as a voter, if you are using a firm that is a very prominent union-busting firm, if this is a firm that is being utilized by folks like Jeff Bezos and Howard Schultz to attack workers, why would I trust your candidate? Why? Why would I vote for a campaign that's willing to do business with such an entity? Yeah. I know that's kind of a sidebar, but I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah. It's definitely worth noting. And the DCCC, Emily's List, the DSCC, I mean, they should blacklist these people. You know, you can be blacklisted by the DCCC for working with AOC, but not for helping Amazon fight workers. Yeah. It's insane. The priorities of these people.
And it's, I think Corey in the chat mentioned this, and I've seen this a lot from other folks, and it just bears repeating. With all the millions of dollars Amazon has spent to try to keep out this union, are you really going to ask me to believe that a fair contract for these workers is going to cost like so much more than that? I mean, and I think that's where it's important to remember that it's not always just about money. They are willing to lose money at times to bust a union.
It's about power.
It's about the power and keeping the power for themselves and keeping workers from realizing the power that we do already have.
Yeah. But, I mean, despite all that, the folks in the Amazon Labor Union, they freaking did it, man. They won.
That's one of the biggest wins in our lifetimes, frankly.
The largest NLRB election win in like 50 years. Unprecedented since like the 30s. An independent union with no funding beating the second largest, most anti-union company in the United States.
And you know what? They harken back to the 30s and a lot of their internal discussions as an organizing committee, as they, studied and did their research and trained themselves. They harken back to that labor movement heyday. Yeah. And I think that's worth all of us keeping in mind that what we've been doing for the last 50 years clearly has not been working very well.
Right.
And that's not to say we throw everything out, but there are times in this country where we have been much more successful as a working class, and we have to learn from that and integrate that into our current realities. And it seems like Chris Smalls and all the other, brothers and sisters out there in Staten Island really took that and ran with it. And we're all benefiting from that.
Absolutely.
So I don't think I'm overstating it by saying it's one of the biggest union wins in our lifetimes. And I think it really gave me some energy, gave me some juice, just listening to Chris and the VP and some of the other organizers, and, hearing him talk about his experience of being fired and how he bounced back from it, and listening to, I think one of the most important things that they've shared in a lot of their interviews over the past week or so is that don't just quit your job, organize your job.
Yes.
Because you're going from one fire to the other.
Right.
Maybe you get paid a little better or a little worse. Maybe benefits are slightly different. But at the end of the day, the problems are going to persist. Management is management. Profits are going to come before you and your other brothers and sisters on the job. And so that's the solution, Yeah. That's the solution. We all work together to organize so that we change it and not just search for these individual solutions of quitting and, going from the fire to the frying pan.
Yeah. They've got another election on Staten Island this month, and they said that workers at more than 50 warehouses across the country have reached out about organizing, so we could really see this thing explode. You just saw a clip from the Valley Labor Report. We are live every Saturday morning from 9:30 a.m. till 12:30 p.m. And we pride ourselves on keeping all of our content free to everybody so that we can talk to as many working folks as possible. If you support the work that we're doing, you think that it's important, you think that it's good, then consider making a monthly contribution to the project, and you can do that on our website, tvlr.fm.